So good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating in our first webinar of 2018 entitled InDesign VDP, Just Add Data. I'm Katie Jackson, the Member Services Director for PrintForward, and I'd like to thank and introduce the developer and leader for today's session, Roberto Mireles, the Production and Print Solutions Engineer for Ricoh, Canada. Roberto is in his 30th year in the imaging industry and is the Advanced Digital Imaging Instructor in the BCIT GTEC program. Roberto is an active PrintForward member on the Membership and Programs Committee, as well as a contributing author for the Design and Print Production Fundamentals textbook. Thank you, Roberto, for sharing your time and expertise today. I hope you all enjoy the session, and with that, I'll pass it on to you, Roberto.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Katie. So before I get into today's topic, I'm going to talk a little bit about VDP, Variable Data Printing. This is where content on the page is driven by data in a record set, and each record generates unique or personalized content. This is nothing new. VDP has been around for a long time, especially in transactional printing and mailing, and it's been a buzzword in the industry for some time as well. So why doesn't everybody do it? Well, there's barriers to entry. So first of all, the nature of variable data printing requires a digital imaging device. And the larger the volume that you're going to produce and the higher the quality requirements, the higher the investment has been. So nowadays, digital presses are prolific, and almost every print shop, regardless of size, has a digital imaging device. Or if you're a designer, you do have a provider that has digital equipment already. Next is applications. So originally, VDP was hand-coded in PostScript, which was very difficult to do. So applications were developed to simplify this. There's a wide range of applications available today, but cost can still be that deterring factor, especially considering you may not know if you have a viable market for this service or not, and the ROI may not be there or not predictable enough to inspire confidence in proceeding into that market. And lastly, expertise. In the days of PostScript VDP, expertise was very rare. It was difficult to program. But even the applications available today do require varying levels of programming capability, and in some cases require you to learn a whole new design application. Not to mention, will your sales professionals understand how to sell VDP? So that brings us to our webinar today, InDesign VDP, Just Add Data. The goal for the webinar is to allow you to leverage tools you already have to create compelling VDP documents. So we're breaking down some of those barriers to entry, giving you the opportunity to test the waters with minimal risk and possibly discovering a new revenue stream for your business. And it all starts with data. So we're going to discover techniques to enhance data using standard spreadsheet applications. In the package that you received, we are working with an Excel file, but that can be imported into, say, Google Sheets or Numbers on a Mac. All these spreadsheet applications, most of these techniques can be applied in those as well. And the start of the show, InDesign DataMerge, which is the tool to connect data to design elements and enabling that personalization. So this little gem of a tool has been part of InDesign since CS2, so way back in 2005. So it has been there, it's just been hidden away, and a lot of people are not aware of this. So we wanted to bring this to light so that you can leverage this. So it all begins with data. So if you want to follow along, you can unzip the provided zip file, but just make sure that you keep all the content in the same folder. That includes the data file, the text file, the InDesign file, and all the images. Keep them all in the same folder because that's going to make things easier later on. All right. So full instructions are included in the PDF labeled Part 1. And I'll show you that here. This is what it looks like. And yeah, so you go ahead and open that PDF and you can follow along with the data Excel file. So not the .txt or the text file, make sure that you're working with the data file, all right? So let's get started with that. All right, so if you're following along in the document, we're going to start with procedure 1. We're going to be numbering with leading zeros. So typically what you'll find in any type of mailing or data entry, we need to have some sort of index field so we know which record we're dealing with. This could be on a printed piece. It could be a number that will be your spill code. So if you drop all the cards or the letters or something, you could put it back into the proper order, especially if you're going to be mailing. So we're going to start on the first column. I'm just going to right click in this column and, oh, actually, I'm not going to be in Sheets. I'm going to work in Excel for now. So right click and we're going to insert. So that inserts the row, or sorry, the column. And I'm just going to name this something useful like num for a number. And there's a few ways you can do this numbering and add a sequential number. So every application has this capability where you can put the first 2 numbers and then select them. And then you could either drag this little corner down and you can see it continues that sequential numbering sequence. Or in the case of Excel and some of the other applications, you can double click that little corner and then it fills it right down to the very bottom of your record set. All right, so that's a pretty easy way to do it. The other way, if you have a very large record set, so say over 1,000 records, you don't want to go through that whole process. In Excel specifically, we can do edit and fill, and then select series. And this allows me to choose columns, for example. In this case, we're dealing with a column. We can specify how many increments we're doing or how the step we're incrementing by what number. And then we can enter the stop number, so the very end of the data set. So when I click OK, it does basically the same thing, but it's a lot more useful in a very large record set. The second thing we want to do with this is we want to add some leading zeros. So typically in a numbering application, we want a very specific number of digits in our numbers. So in this case, I want to see 5 digits in there. But I don't want it to exceed when I'm getting into double digits and triple digits. I want to maintain the 5-digit number. So to do that, we're going to select the entire column, right-click again, and we're going to format cells. And here we're going to go down to custom. And it gives us some examples of the formatting that we can use. The formatting I want to use for here, though, I'm going to type in 4 zeros. So that indicates what I want to pad the number with. And then just the pound symbol, which indicates whatever is in that field, in that cell, add it into it. So when I hit OK, what you'll see is you maintain the 5 characters regardless of how many numbers or how many digits are in the number, and it adds those zeros at the beginning. So just this one little piece is something that you could already apply into, say, a numbering application like tickets or raffle tickets or anything that requires a sequential number. So very useful tool, just being able to do this. So the second procedure, so let me just go down to the next page. So second procedure, we're going to add an image reference based on a rule. So this is where we're going to start getting into a little bit of programming. And the programming is not terribly difficult. It's fairly simple, and Excel and other applications help you through it. So the first step is we need to put a column header on the column. And this is specifically so that InDesign, when we're bringing it into InDesign and using DataMerge, it will know that this column is a graphic or an image. So to do that, we require a special symbol at the beginning, which is the @ symbol. And for this one, this is going to be a background image, so I'm just going to call it BG. If I hit enter here, I'm going to get an error in Excel because the @ symbol is a reserved character for Excel. So in order to get that to work, all I have to do is put an apostrophe at the beginning. Then Excel knows it's not a function, so go ahead and just use whatever's typed in after that apostrophe. So now we're going to do the programming. Okay. So whenever we're doing any sort of program or commands within Excel, we start out with the equal sign. And now I just have to start typing. And if you notice, the one I want to use is the if statement. So I could click on it, and it'll give me a little bit of instruction on the bottom here, a little pop-up that tells you the format that's required. Excel is kind of succinct. It doesn't really give you lots of information, but I'm just switching over to Sheets here, and I'll do the same sort of thing. And you'll see that in Sheets, I can do that, but it gives me a lot more information of what's going on and a better explanation of what the actual command does. So again, doesn't matter which application you're using, there's a lot of ways you can do it. So the first thing that we need to put in here is a logical test. So this is the question we're going to ask. In this case, I'm going to determine if the gender is male or female. I'm going to use a different image. So the first thing I do is select that field or that cell. And if I go back, it automatically populates that. So if B2, so the gender field, is equal to, and then in quotations, we need to put in exactly what would be in that field. We need to capitalize if it's capitalized, and punctuation, all that is relevant, okay? So this is what we're looking for, if B2 has male in it. So that's our logical test. Then you put a comma, then you just return, or you provide what will you return in this cell if gender is male. So in this case, I'm going to do day.tiff, which is one of the graphics I've already created and is sitting in the same folder as my InDesign file and my data file. So this is the true statement. And then the other statement is going to be, if it's anything other than male in that cell, then what am I going to return? And in this case, it's going to be dusk.tiff. Okay. So that's it. I hit enter, and then I can see that, yes, this is John is male, so it should be day, and females should be dusk. So in order to populate that all this formula into every single cell, we can use a little trick of double clicking on that little box in the bottom right hand corner, and it fills it down. And you can see now Hope is dusk, Eric is day, so we can see that the data is working, or the program is working. It's important that you validate that the programming works correctly, because as you get a little bit more complicated, it's very important to do that. So I'm going to do one more. Again, we need the apostrophe if I'm going to do the @ symbol, and I'm going to call this one plain, because I have a plain graphic that I will switch out, and I'll do the exact same thing again. Sorry, I do need to select that one and scroll over. Should probably do the if statement first. If, select that, and then if I don't want to actually go and browse to that cell, if I know the cell, I could just type it in. So if B2 is equal to, again, male, comma, true will be, let's see, plain underscore blue. And if it's the field is not male, then I'm going to use plain underscore orange. Now this is a mistake because I do have to put quotes around that, so it's important that everything is done correctly. Okay, so that should work, and again we're going to copy it down to all the cells, and we can see again the programming is working. Right, so that's how we're entering using the data that we have to determine what graphics we're going to put. So the next part, so procedure 3, we're going to go a little bit further. We're going to use the OR statement. So what that does is allows me to put multiple questions or conditions into the equation. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to look at the province or state field here, and I'm going to segregate it out. So if it's from BC or the person's in BC or Alberta, I'm going to put that in the Western Division or West, and everything else is going to be East. So this can be useful, for example, just to determine what territory that customer is in. And then we can use this information to populate which sales rep is associated to there. Okay. So again, equal and if. But this time, immediately after the if, I'm going to do or. So in the or, it does require the different logical tests. So I'm going to do multiple ones, so multiple questions. So again, I'm going to go to the field that I want. So this is going to be the state. I'm going to select that. And then so if under state is equal to BC, and make sure that it is capitalized because it is in the data. And then I'm going to do the other condition. So if G2 is equal to AB for Alberta. So now I have the two different conditions that both have to, or either have to be true. So the or is for either can be true, and it would return a true response. If you wanted to do that all the conditions have to be met, then this would be and instead of or. Okay, so I have my logical test. So now I just need to put what the true value is. So if it is BC or Alberta, then that's going to be West. And if not, everything else is going to be East. Okay, so because this first record was in Quebec, it's East, and we double click again, and looks like all our programming is good again, right? So that's how we can use multiple conditions to determine the result. So the next procedure we're going to do, procedure 4, is combining multiple data fields. So this is very useful. If, for example, we had a first name, second name, and we wanted to do a full name field, we can use, as instructed here, using the ampersand symbol to combine multiple fields together. I'm going to show you one application for this. So I'm going to call this BG image. And again, because this is going to be an image field, I do need to put the apostrophe and the at. So what I'm going to do here, again, I need to do equals. I'm just going to go to the city field. And then I'm going to use the ampersand to combine that information, so the first record was Montreal, with some extension that's going to be my graphic. So I'm going to do the ampersand, or sorry, the quote, period, JPEG, JPG, and close the quote. So what this is doing is now I have Montreal JPEG. And if I double click on the box again, it's going to fill it all the way down, and every single city will have now an image reference. So the idea here is I create all the different images that I'm going to need for my little project, and then I actually create those images, or I get those images and name them exactly what I put in this field. So it makes it much easier to deal with instead of having a bunch of images that are already named and then having to fill in what names you want here. So this is a little technique that really optimizes and makes it more efficient. Now you notice there's a lot of cities and a lot of repeating. There is a technique that you can pull out all unique entries that are in this column. I will add that into some bonus content that we'll send in afterwards. So I will explain how to do that, but not in this particular webinar today. Okay, so let's move on to the next component, which is adding a QR code. So QR codes have been around for a little bit and are very popular for connecting print media to online media. So if you have a phone or something that scans that QR code, and it allows it to jump into a web page or send an email or something like that, connected into the digital world. So the physical world can be connected to the digital world. In InDesign, they added the QR functionality into DataMerge in 2014. So I believe that was version 10 of the Creative Cloud. So Creative Cloud 2014 added this function of being able to do QR codes. If you don't have that version, if you have an earlier version, then this function won't work, but every other function still works the same. So the key for a QR code is going to be the header again, and this time it's the pound symbol. So the pound symbol tells InDesign that the information to follow is actually going to be a QR code. And QR codes, there's a lot of programming that you can do for QR codes, and it can pull up all sorts of different data. I'm going to keep it simple here and just do an email so that when they click on that QR code, it's just going to launch an email application with the destination predefined. There are a lot more complex ways you can do this, and that'll be part of the bonus material I was talking about. I'll send some information on the various QR code programming codes that you need to be able to do this. Okay, so again, I'm going to start with an equal sign. This time, I'm going to tell it to do mail to and a colon. So this is the command that the QR reader will understand this is an email address. So from here, I'm going to use my ampersand technique to include one of the other fields I have, East, or territory. And then again, I'm going to include some static information, which is going to be at PrintForward.org. Okay, so in that way, what I've done is I've used the territory field. So perhaps PrintForward has different email addresses for anybody from the East and anybody from the West. So you can use this information to generate the appropriate email address for this customer. Again, we're going to double click on this corner, and it's going to populate the rest of the data. So that's basically it for the programming on our data file. So the next step, we have to save this. So InDesign only has two formats that it supports for data. It will not support this native format of Excel. It only supports CSV, which is comma separated value file, which is a flat file that's just text and commas, and also the tab delimited format, which is usually .txt as the extension. I prefer the .txt. It just makes things a little bit easier because there's a lot of variations of CSV, and not all of them will work with InDesign. Before I save my working data file, though, I want to save this file. This file is the actual file that has all the programming in it. So if I needed to change some programming because it didn't work correctly, I want to be able to get back to this one. So I'm going to save this one first as Excel. So I'm just going to call this data2. And then I'm going to also save this again as my working file that's going to work in InDesign. So in the format that I chose, which in this case, I'm going to choose tab delimited. Okay. And I've already done this once, so it's going to ask me to replace it, and I will do that. And you will get this prompt. So this warning indicates that you're going to lose all the programming. You're only going to have the values that the programming returned in this new file format. So that's why we saved it in Excel first. All right, I'm going to continue. So that's it. Now my data is ready. I can switch over to InDesign. All right, let me get back to the presentation. All right. So again, in the resources file, we do have InDesign VDP.idml. So IDML is a format that allows older versions of InDesign to actually use this file. So if I left it in the native one, I have InDesign 2018. Anybody with an older version wouldn't be able to open this. So this is a good way to share InDesign files without having to have the same version. All right, so let's jump into that one. It should be on here. There we go. So this is just a basic card. It has some information on here. And what I'm doing here is I'm making a mock-up first. So I'm placing everything I need in this document just with placeholders. And then I'm going to replace them with the actual data content that's going to switch out. There are some instructions in this data panel, actually before I get there, where to find it. Under Window and Utilities, this is where you'll find the DataMerge tool. Now, older versions of InDesign may have it in a different location. It may be under Layout or View. But in 2018, 2017, and some of the newer versions, it's under Window, Utilities, and DataMerge. And this will open up this panel here. Now, there are some instructions here, but I would recommend that you don't follow these instructions specifically. And the reason for that is these instructions will generate a InDesign spread or a document with the number of records you have. So if you had 1,000 records, it would, in this case, this is a two-sided card, it would generate 2,000 page InDesign file, which is huge and will really choke your computer. So I don't recommend doing that. So I'm going to go through a different process that's going to be a little bit more efficient. So the first thing we have to do is we have to attach the data to this card. So how I do that is I click on this corner right up here, this little menu item, and select data source. From here, I'm going to pick my data2.txt that I just finished creating. And when I open that, the file cannot be opened when you try and open it in InDesign. So I actually have to close it here. And it's going to ask me to save it again, which I don't need to do. Okay, so let's do that again. Go to the data source, select it, data2.txt, open it. And now what you'll see is all those column headers show up as placeholders or, fields. And you notice that the ones that are images are indicated here, that these are images. So it started with the @ symbol. So InDesign knew that these were images. And the QR code, starting with the pound, is showing up here. So InDesign knows this is a QR code. So now this is actually the easiest part of the whole process, because all we're doing is we're selecting the individual items that we've pre-done in our mockup, and then just double-clicking on what they represent. So this one here is the given name. So all I have to do is double-click, and given name is put in there. Right now, it's showing what the field name is. If I want to actually see the data, I just have to click on the preview button. So now I see it as John. And if I scroll through down at the bottom, I could see that the name changes for every single record. Nice and simple. So we'll do it for the other items as well. So this is the num field. So I could double click, it selects everything, make it the number field. So we see it's the 1 and it's changing. Okay. I'm going to do the selection tool, select the background image, make sure that we're only selecting the background image, and scrolling down BG. I can scroll to make sure that image is turning. There it is. It's changing in color. The airplane's the same thing. I might as well actually go to record 2 so we can actually see the change happen immediately. So if we do make a mistake in our data, it will not turn out correctly. So I'm actually going to change the data source to one I've already created before. I knew I would get something wrong here. There we go. So now the plane is actually showing up correctly. So again, it's very important that you have the naming of the fields correct in your data file so that it will know which graphic to pull. So likely what I did is I forgot an underscore or capitalization was incorrect in the data file. But we could carry on with the demo anyways. So the next part I want to do is the QR code. So the QR code, we just select it. Make sure that it's the placeholder is selected and not the actual graphic inside. And then I double click QR, and there we go. We have a QR code. So in this data set that I've used the second one, the QR code is a lot more complicated because it's a full email string. But if you're following along, your QR code will have a lot less boxes if it's just an email. And make sure you verify. So use your phone, check the QR code, make sure it's coming up with the data that you expected. If not, then go back to your data file and correct it. So that's the first side of the card. The second side of the card is for mailing purposes. So it's really important that we have everything set up correctly. Again, I want to put this spill code or number on here so I can make sure that I'm getting the right back for the front of the card. And then again, just double click and enter in a bunch of information. We're just double clicking the fields into our mockup. So now these are variables. So this is going to be street address, city, province, and postal code. There we go. Now, Canada Post does prefer that all this information is in all caps. So to do that, we don't want to have it in all caps in our data file because that's not going to translate to the layout. We have to do the formatting at the layout itself. So this double capital P makes everything in all caps. So now our formatting is correct. And keep in mind that any formatting you do in InDesign, so you notice this text has the white outline on it, the white stroke on it, that's all happens in InDesign. So whatever you create in InDesign, this data that you're applying to it will also have that styling associated to it. So it makes it very easy to make that compelling document that we're really trying to produce. And we can scroll through, make sure everything is correct. So then now we have our document created and we need to have it printed. So like I said before, we don't necessarily want to use the tools that are within DataMerge that produces a merged InDesign file. So that would be if I clicked on this button right here, I would get this large InDesign file with thousands of pages in, would just choke my computer. So we don't want to do that. What you do want to do is click into the menu item again, and you'll notice there's export to PDF. This is what we want to do. So when we export to PDF, I can select the entire record set or individual records or a range of records. So if I'm just testing the data to make sure it's okay, I could do this. So I'm going to do all the records and click OK. Now you notice that all the preview disappeared and became the placeholders again. That's required whenever you're saving the file out. Preview automatically gets unchecked. In older versions, it didn't automatically uncheck it. You have to uncheck it before you go into the save process. Now, there's a lot of different choices here. Usually, InDesign, the default will be high quality print, but what I would recommend, especially for newer RIPs that you have that have the Adobe PDF print engine, we want to save it as a PDF X4. PDF X4 embeds all the fonts, embeds the working space that you're designing in InDesign. So if this was a US web coded swap v2, it would actually assign it that. So when we're at the RIP, it's much easier to manage color because the information is in there. So definitely recommend PDFX4 for this purpose. So let's go export. And then I could name the file. Forward. And then we could see the output. So it's generating the 100 records. So this process is the most time-consuming of the entire design process. But in this case, it's going to take a lot less time to generate that PDF than it would if I had generated an InDesign file with the number of pages that are in here. Okay, so it's just going to take a minute to do all those records, and then we'll see the output in PDF. So while it's doing this, I want to talk a little bit about optimization. So when we're sending variable data work over to a printer, a print device, a digital imaging device, there are certain techniques that will help that RIP process much, much faster. And that has to do with caching. The nice thing about this is when InDesign generates this PDF, it does mark all the content that is reusable. So those images of the plane and the background, we only have 2 of those, but they're used in every single document. So it does mark those or flag those as items that are reusable. So on the RIP itself, depending on the RIP you have, it can take advantage of that caching technique. And there's a certain setting in the RIP that will allow it to read that and optimize. So in other words, what it will do is it will render those objects up front and put it into storage, into a cache area. And whenever it requires it on the page, it will pull it up. Now, another important thing when we're finished with the compiling to the PDF, we want to make sure there are no overset text in our records. So that means that our text box, the data that was supposed to go in that text box, doesn't overflow or is too long for that box. So we do want to pay attention to this. We have no overset, so we're good. There should be no records overlapping. If there was any records that the text would overlap, it would indicate which record that was. I'm going to click OK, and here's my finished product. And you can see there's 198. There's 99 records times 2 for a 2-sided document. And as I scroll through, all the information is correct. My spill code or my number sequence is following along, and I have a good file. So that's basically the whole process of using InDesign for creating these variable data documents. So I did talk a little bit about the file optimization while it was building. So PDF flags the reusable items for caching. And this is the setting that I was talking about. This is a fiery RIP. So the setting that you would use is under the VDP tab, and it's this little checkbox that says Cache PDF and PS objects. So this utilizes that optimization, and it allows the RIP to actually process much, much faster. A good example of that is if you were to do a Word mail merge and send it to the RIP, every single page with the same graphic has to be ripped over and over again. It could take, let's say, an hour to rip that. With this process in place and that caching scheme being utilized, that 1 hour rip time drops down to something like 6-7 minutes. So it's a huge optimization to be able to do this. And using InDesign DataMerge in combination with the PDF really, really exploits that. So that's the bulk of our webinar today. So to recap, our goal was to leverage the tools you already have to create compelling VDP documents and really breaking down those barriers that we were talking about. So digital imaging, like I said, most of the printers today have a digital press in their shop, or they have a place to send digital work to. The applications, well, now you've seen you could do it within InDesign, a tool that you probably already have. And the expertise, hopefully I was able to give you a bit of knowledge here, and you get the expertise to at least start down that road. And if you do find success and you outgrow this solution, that means a couple of things. One, you've validated the viability of VDP in your marketplace, and you've generated a revenue stream that can help pay for any software investment to get you to the next level. So here's a great way to get started. It's not going to cost you anything. You can test the waters. You can see how your sales rep can play around with that and see how they would sell it, how they can add value to their portfolio. And hopefully, you know, we generate that large revenue stream from it. With that, I'm going to open up the mics, and if anybody has any questions. Okay, and we did have a question on the chat. Yes, so the question is, would you also put in printer's marks as you do under the press ready setting? You can do that. So let me just jump over there real quick. So if I was in here and I was generating the PDF again, and I'm just going to do a single record, make it quicker. And I have this here. All these settings in the PDF I could actually do. So I can go into marks and bleeds and set the printer's marks. But one thing to remember is this is a card, right? So it's probably going to be ganged up, and your imposition tool that you have probably already does the printer's marks. So you don't want to double it up and do it on the original file. What you do want to do, however, is if there are bleeds, you do want to set it here to use the document bleeds or add bleed here. So that way the PDF file actually has the bleed content in it. So that's a very important point. Thanks for bringing that up, Marilyn. Any other questions?
You'll be sending out this seminar and the recording with it?
Yeah, so basically it's being recorded. So this whole webinar that we've done today is recorded, and we'll make it available likely through the PrintForward website, and people who've participated will have access to that webinar in the short term. In the long term, it'll be available to all members as one of the learning and development sections of the webpage, hopefully. That's the plan anyways.
Okay, thank you.
Another question on the chat. Notice when exporting a CSV file that it will automatically add a temp folder with a jumble of numbers. Have you had this issue as well? So here's another reason why I really prefer to use the tab delimited. So a couple of things. Comma delimited, what if there's a comma in the actual data itself? Will the format actually determine the breakpoint correctly, or will it shift everything in that one record? So that can be problematic. The other thing is there are different variations of CSV file, and some do encode some special codes into it. Again, depends on the application as well. So again, I would recommend, I haven't seen this particular issue where it automatically adds a temp folder with a jumble of numbers, but that's likely due to the CSV format that you're selecting. Try and keep it as basic as possible. So anything that just says comma separated value and doesn't have any information, that's the format you want to say. Any other questions?
Roberto, it's Marilyn again.
Hey, Marilyn.
Do you think that most of the printers have now subscribed to the Adobe, so everybody's Creative Suite should be up to date?
Not necessarily. I know a lot of print shops that I go to don't necessarily have the Creative Cloud subscription. They have whatever version they had in their shop. The key things to remember is that, one, DataMerge has been available since CS2. So the likelihood that you have something older than say, CS2 is pretty rare. The other thing to remember is QR codes. QR codes only came into DataMerge in 2014. So if you have an older version, you wouldn't be able to use the QR code stuff in InDesign or in DataMerge. QR codes were available in previous versions as static only, not dynamic. Okay, so those are the key things around the version of InDesign that you have that you should be aware of when you're doing this. Any other questions? Oh, okay. Someone has asked a recommended resource to learn more about Excel programming and the programming within it. There are a lot of resources out there. Lynda.com has some great tutorials and things. It is a paid subscription for that, but there are all sorts of YouTube videos that can help. What I always do myself is, Google. Go on Google, search out what I'm trying to do, and I could usually find some YouTube videos that will go through it and things like that. When I first started doing this, that's what I did. I found a video that was out there that explained some of the basics on this, and then after playing with it, using it in my classroom at BCIT, we really expanded it and really fine-tuned it to what you see today. All right, so I'm going to assume that all our questions are done. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next time.